everybody. My name is Noël Michienzi, and I'm the owner and founder of Unmuted Creative. This is We Are Unmuted, an interview series where we get real about people's journeys, the ups, the downs, the wins, the lessons, and how they've been unmuting in their lives. Today, I am super excited to be interviewing Travis Pomposello. His career started as a production assistant at MTV. He moved on to write for Nickelodeon, produced for the Late Night Show with David Letterman, became creative director at Discovery Inc., partner and executive creative director of Frederator Networks, SVP of marketing at CSTV CBS, co-founded Epix, and then opened his own agency, Bella Vita, and then scaled it with clients like Netflix and Amazon. I mean, where and what hasn't he done and been? Super excited. Why we're talking to him today? Because his journey is exactly what We Are Unmuted is about. Breaking through plateaus, amplifying voices, transforming industries from the inside out. And who better to hear it from than Travis Pomposello? Thank you, Travis, so much for joining me today. I am happy you accepted to do this interview for We Are Unmuted newsletter. We met on LinkedIn, and I am just super excited that you agreed and are my first interviewee. So, Travis, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the honor of being the first.
Yeah.
And as well as, you reaching out to me on LinkedIn. We met on LinkedIn. However, a lot of folks on LinkedIn, stay a bit muted because they're afraid of being cringe and reaching out to one another. And I really appreciate that you reached out to me and that we've developed a bit of a peer-to-peer friendship here. So it's exciting. So a little bit about me. I'm a seasoned media veteran. I worked my way from intern up into the C-suite in the creative side of the TV industry. I got tired of not making things, so I resigned from corporate media and I started a creative agency where I could get back to making things and ran that agency up until the beginning of this year, when I exited that agency and I started working with creative agency founders like you, Noel, and helping them, grow and scale their businesses without like destroying themselves in the process. There's no other way to say it. I mean, when creative people come into running their own business, there's a lot to unpack there and a lot to go on, or to use your language, a lot to unmute often, because we, as creatives, we get to stay, in a sense, personally intrinsic to our craft, to our writing, to our graphic design, to our editing, to our PR campaigns, to our marketing campaigns. They do the speaking for us. But when you start your own business, you become the voice, you become the face, you become the thing. So um, I'll compliment you out of the gate. Doing this is one of those things of putting yourself out there and being the face of your company, where it's more than the work speaking for itself. It's the founder speaking for themselves.
Absolutely. And it's hard. It's hard to put yourself out there in social media. People are not always the nicest. So you got to
Yeah.
have some thick skin. But I feel like creatives have a unique version of thick skin from all of the reviews and edits and things that we've heard. I feel like it makes us somewhat qualified to put
100,
ourselves out there.
100%, 100%.
All right.
Correct.
I'm going to jump into the questions. I think you answered a few little ones. But let's start with something that first inspired you to enter your field.
Yeah. So I grew up in a creative home. My mother was a photographer, my father a musician. And my father, more than anything, wanted me to be a rock star. And I was an okay musician, even though he spent countless hours trying to get me there. And I was always looking for a place to be that rock star. And when the opportunity came for me to be able to apply for an internship at MTV,
Wow.
especially in the late 80s, that was the closest thing I was going to get to be a rock star. And, getting a job at MTV in Times Square, New York City at the age of 18, I felt like a rock star. And that's really what started my career, because that, um, it was really addicting as you can imagine to have that type of prestige, even though I wasn't getting paid, and even though I was struggling and having that opportunity. But that's what really got me started, and I loved it.
No, I bet. Lights, camera, action, and the
Yeah.
fullest of all
Hmm.
things.
Hmm.
I love that. I also am from a family of artists and musicians and just long line. My mom's an artist and a singer. I'm an artist and a singer. So it is definitely something that sticks with you, right? And you want to
Yeah.
carry it kind of out.
Yeah.
Um, what voices or perspectives do you feel sorry. What voices or perspectives did you feel were being muted in your industry when you first started?
So when I first started, and some of this still holds true today,
Mhm.
but when I first started in particular, with that format being still somewhat new, MTV, right, music videos, first of its kind, and everything that was going on there, the pipeline of talent into internships and to more entry level jobs as well as to executives was really about having a high powered education, right? I'm speaking like Ivy League, very expensive, very prestigious. Um, that's where the other talent was being looked, or they were looking for folks who had big careers in radio,
Hmm.
right? Because there wasn't anything else really transferable. So
Right.
that was the thing that was really muted. Was I felt incredibly fortunate to be able to convince the hiring person, maybe I fibbed a little bit,
Yeah.
to give me a shot. Without having that big Ivy League education at 18 years old to come in and be an intern. And but I felt, I had a lot of friends along the way who I encouraged to also apply because I wanted us to all work together. And it was they felt very much, muted by the fact that they didn't have that type of pedigree, that type of education, those type of connections.
Yeah. Did other people you work with and have those type of degrees all around you?
Yeah, so all around me were all Ivy Leaguers or private university students with, big degrees. And yeah, my way was, get my education from them in a sense. And I found myself, I would see what books they were reading and I would go buy those books. At that time, MTV was above a bookstore. So I'd go down and I'd buy those books and I'd read those books so I could have the conversations with the coworkers. And I just, I knew I couldn't be out they had bigger educations than me, but I knew that I could work harder. And that's how we kind of met in the middle there.
Love that. Do you still have
Yeah.
some of those books?
I don't. I donated my books a while ago to I live in New York City and space is at a premium and you
Yeah,
can only hold on to so many books at a time and still have a place to sleep.
that's fair. That's
Yeah.
fair. I've always wanted to build my like design and art library up. I have a little bit, but I would love maybe 10, 20 years from now to have like full library of every
It's like, yeah,
the history. It really grows with the books that are being written in that time. I love it.
no question.
Um, okay, so unmuting. I mean, that's why I wanted to bring you here. And I know we've talked about this personally, but I want to put this actually in the interview. What does it mean to you to be unmuted?
Sure. And I'm going to speak this a little bit in stages.
Hmm.
Because what it means for me now is different than what it's meant at different stages in my life and my career. Initially, as I described, being unmuted was about being given a fair chance
Hmm.
without having those, let's call them privileges. I didn't grow up in that type of environment or that type of home. I mentioned my parents were artists. Didn't say they were famous artists. So that equates to
Yeah.
not a lot of money and a lot of struggling. And I didn't have that privilege. So I had to work, hard and I really had to unmute myself because I couldn't let that be what held me back or make me feel insecure. I needed to be able to be in the room with these very highly educated other young folks and be able to hold my own, be able to stay in those conversations and do those things. And I really had to work hard on not silencing myself or muting myself because I feeling I wasn't smart enough or I wasn't good enough or I didn't have the things. Later on in my career, as I became more established as a creative voice inside of the company, it was very easy for me to want to mute myself so that I wouldn't jeopardize my job or make a bad decision or put up something that wasn't well received. And I had to learn to be brave and sort of unmute this different piece of bravery because now it was that expectations were higher, right? I had 10 years in, I have these skills now I should be delivering and that's what I was getting paid for. So I really needed to unmute myself there. Today, when I think about unmuting myself, it really comes to um, how to pay it forward, right? How am I've had these accomplishments. I've done these things. I've probably impacted a lot of people I don't realize via the creative work that I've done, and I've also impacted a lot of people that I've worked alongside of, either me for them laterally or below. And I don't ever want to mute that. I never want that to become something that I forget. And I want it to always be part of my collective conversation, whether that be in working with, founders like yourself and sharing those things so that you can, shortcut the 20 something years it took me to learn that to be able to do that, or to share insights with how you're working with somebody that's working for you, or just in your own creative yourself. And this can manifest itself often for founders around sales, right? Sales is a place where creative founders often mute themselves because they're afraid of being cringe or they're afraid of doing these things. And so, being conscious of that, now no longer being the voice, but being the listener. And so, in a sense, I will say that I've unmuted my ears now to be more of a listener and to take on a deeper understanding, to remember and not mute was what my intrinsic motivations were when I was at those stages, and work with others, whether they be a client, a friend, or anything, to unmute that about themselves and have that courage.
Absolutely. I feel like we lose all these little things along our lives that could be great lessons for others, and we just keep putting one foot in front of another, in front of another. And like those little things in your life, obviously the big things, we want to share those and those get shared. But sometimes those little lessons that you don't even realize
Yeah.
could change somebody's whole life, those are the things that we don't end up sharing. It's all the big moments, you know?
Right. Right.
So I love that you're implementing that into your life and your career now after all the experience that you have had in your field. Was there a moment when you realized you needed to speak up or do things differently? Was there a shift change along the
There,
way?
there were many of them along the way, but one that's always been very notable for me and very eye-opening for me is I spoke of how I started. When I was fast forward many years, maybe 20 some odd years, to when I was in a real role of power, let's say. And I was an executive at a network. And we had started our very first, and this is when this was happening a lot on the corporate side, diversity initiative. And I was the head of the diversity committee. And I looked around the table and I looked around the room, outside of the table, outside on the floor of the office. And I looked at my own team and I realized there were a lot of personas missing.
Hmm.
And I had to look at why that was. And the first initiative was to really look at the hiring practices of the company. Why weren't people coming in with these things? And the things that we found were pretty astounding. They ran from the fact that sometime, we weren't maybe getting applications from folks because, I'll give a simple anecdote. We found that um, certain minorities or ethnic groups didn't have access to home computing. So they didn't have the advanced skills of working with certain, design programs or these things to have that even basic portfolio for an entry level job outside of what the little bit of computer time they had maybe at a lab at school or a design program that they took. So they weren't even applying because they just didn't feel they had the portfolio that was put on the job description.
Right.
Um, Likewise, found that there were a lot of women in particular who felt that they just couldn't break into such a male-dominated field, so they didn't even bother. And those things were really eye-opening. And I had to very much take a stand and unmute myself to challenge the HR department. I was lucky to have a wonderful partner in the HR department who dug deep into finding let's call them headhunters who could go out and look for these individuals. Never wanted to hire someone just because of their something.
Right.
But, yes, you always want to hire the person who's the best for the job. But why weren't those people getting to us was the thing that we worked really hard on. And we really had to, that team, those partners, we really had to, as you said, unmute ourselves to speak up about it, which was fairly new at the time, but these problems have not changed. They still continue. And, I'll say that to my friends still in corporate. I know right now everyone in corporate is struggling with the mass layoffs and the changes going on in the world. But these problems still exist. And perhaps if we do better at this problem, we might have less of the other problems. So let's have to still keep that open or unmuted, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fair. I mean, especially in this job market right now is it I didn't believe how maybe bad it had gotten just by social media. I try and tune out the
Mhm.
negativity as much as one can. But LinkedIn, it's a professional platform. So you're
Yeah.
hearing lots of people's stories. And I thought at one point in time, before I started Unmuted officially, that I was just getting filtered all the bad stuff. Like everybody
Right.
was losing their jobs, everyone was, not doing hundreds and hundreds of interviews and resumes. And this is just me seeing this. And
Hmm.
then the numbers started to actually show, and I started to see that, wow, my entire network is struggling. And that is the first time I noticed that in my entire career, which is not as long as yours, but it has been quite some time.
Hmm.
And it is a little frightening to see that and
Yeah.
know that there are glimmers of hope and happiness throughout there. And I am of the belief that we're in this downward and there's only up from here.
Well, I hope you're wrong, and I do believe sometimes we do are a little bit of a victim of algorithms.
Yeah.
A good friend of mine used to point out to me 10 years ago, at least, she
Yeah.
would say, if you Google "I hate football," you'll get a picture of a football.
Wow.
And I think, and that still holds very true with the algorithm on social platforms like a LinkedIn. If you start reading those posts about struggle, the algorithm will serve you posts about struggle. So something to keep in mind. Take it with a grain of salt. And I still believe and will always believe that there's opportunities for everybody, whether those are self-made or through hustle or networking or finding the right fit or someone taking a chance on you. Their opportunities are there. You can't give that up. You can't give up on that.
That's true. I do think if you work on yourself, you'll find where you need to be for sure. And
100%.
I don't know, that's what I feel like Unmuted really was for me. You probably know, but choosing a name for your business has been, other than naming my children, it was one of the hardest things to do. And landing on Unmuted felt very unmuted to me, as
Yeah.
redundant as that is, but it was a big moment just to say legally too, with all of the things you have to do in starting a business, saying I am claiming this name as my own for my business, who I am, my brand, and now I'm going to live it moving forward in my life. That was a big step forward for me in taking a chance on myself. And
Well,
I,
I'm gonna pause you because it's something that I work on a lot
Mhm.
with my clients, with the agency founders that I have. And it comes to you start out of intrinsic motivation. Nobody starts. I have not met a creative agency owner who started it out of I want to be a millionaire. They started out of, like I started. I want to make things again. I want to write again. I want to create things again. You're starting it, for your reasons. And the name. and I, this is applause for you, is intrinsically tied to your motivation for starting the agency. And that's the right first step. What I challenge you for is, when I speak to you again in 5 years and you're doing 5 million a year, that you haven't lost that intrinsic tie and you haven't lost that intrinsic motivation. And you're not coming to me saying, Travis, I need your help. I'm so underwater. And I
Yeah.
say to you, well, Noel, what was the intrinsic motivation that you started the agency with? And you go, oh, I knew you were going to say that. So that, it's a beautiful thing that you've come up with that name because it's connected to that motivation. And that's the place to start.
Absolutely. I love that. And I will think of that going forward every time. Like, all right, if I'm feeling underwater, where do I align myself again? I
That's
do
right.
that in life too. So I feel like if you do it with your business, you should stay as whole as one can be.
Oh, yes.
So how do you think your perspective or approach has maybe shifted since you started unmuting in that situation at work specifically?
Well, it really that's, as I said, one of many things. And it's something I think about now a lot. I thought about it when I was running my agency as well. And I encourage other, agency owners to think this way. Um, you know, we have businesses. And when I think about my business, I always think about, is this a business I would leave to a loved one? Would I leave this business to my son? Would I leave this business to my spouse or my partner or to, my next of kin in its current state, in its current mission, with its current history and its legacy? And in order to do that, you really do have to stay unmuted. You can't mute yourself on taking projects or clients or things that, again, are not aligned with your intrinsic motivation, or your team's mission, or the type of work you want to be doing. It's okay to have the desire to take a project because you have to pay your rent or your mortgage or these things, but let's not lose sight of it, right? So when I think about it, what that was the same thing that was part of the driver of having a more diverse team at a TV network is I didn't want like my son to come in one day and be like, so Dad, how come there's no women here? Or
Right.
hey, how come there's no, minorities here? Or how come, there's no, LGBTQ plus, people in the company? Why is it all like you and a bunch of other guys, like, who look the same?
Yeah.
And, that was important to me. I didn't want to, I started to think about that all the time. I mentioned my own father, who was a musician, and he had a small jingle business. In that's where he ended up. He was performing a lot, but also doing jingles. And he had a small jingle business with a small team. And he died suddenly of a heart attack. And he had about 4 employees and a physical location in New York City that I inherited. And I didn't inherit any ethical mess, but I inherited a business mess.
Yeah.
And I had to untangle finances and people and places and things and contracts and these types of things. Thank God I didn't have to, my father was a very honest and ethical person. In fact, his moniker was honest in front of his first name as a performer. But there was an entanglement I had there. And, when I think about that, and the reason he had that mess was because he stayed muted as someone who was a struggling artist, a struggling musician. He didn't want to talk about finance, didn't want to ask anyone for help with finance, didn't want to ask anybody help for contracts because it was a a point of problem for him or shame, if you will. So he really stayed muted in that category. So I find, I stay unmuted, encourage everybody with the transparency of, creating a business, creating a life that if you were gone tomorrow, the people who pick up those pieces, you'd feel good about it.
Yeah, I love that. That's gonna stick with me for sure.
Oh, good. I'm glad.
Yeah, I mean, we all love our loved ones, right? Like, what are we building for them? What are we leaving behind? At one of my restaurant jobs many, many moons ago, on our POS system, it said something along the lines, I can't remember the exact quote, but it said like, if you're falling behind, asking for help is a strength, not a weakness.
Yeah.
It was much more eloquent and quote-y than that. But it
Hmm.
was one of our statements, like at this restaurant as a bartender, as a server, and we all worked really hand in hand at this specific restaurant I worked at. Not all the other ones are like that. But we really did feel comfortable in the weeds to ask for help from our teammates, and they would take on
Hmm.
whatever horrible thing you needed them to do. I need 19 waters to a table over there. The worst part of our jobs in the middle of a rush, right?
Sure.
But we would drop it and do it for every single person. I worked in many restaurants while I was in college and bars. Not all of them were that okay. And I always looked back. I mean, here we are many, many moons later, and I still remember that statement and wonder if because that was there every time we touched our screen and every time we thought about it was an inner quote, that if we all worked with that just kind of subconsciously in the back of our mind, we
Hmm.
didn't feel like help was asking for help was a negative thing. It was just so easy to when I moved to a different restaurant later, that was not the mantra, and everybody for themselves. And I mean, we still had teamwork, but there was a different level of teamwork in that feeling where asking for help was normal, okay, you jump in.
Sure.
I want that with whatever team I build moving forward. That to me feels unmuted, and it goes back to your dad, and there is shame behind the things that you don't want to share, but there's strength there if
That's
you
right.
push through those fears and that shame. But it definitely takes time to work through those things
It
within yourself to get
sure
there.
does. It sure does. Yeah, it's not a light switch. That it does take work. But I think, as I said, with the reminder of thinking of, we all love somebody, and think about where that's going to land.
I love that. Would you say one of the questions that I wanted to ask was who or what gives you the courage to stay unmuted? Would you say it was your dad, or is there other people?
There are many people, right? I do have a son, definitely one of the ones. I want him to, there's a common thing in psychology, right? About the pain gain model.
Mm,
So, right, if it could cause me some pain today to say no to a project or a client that could be potentially, let's say, an unethical project, working for something, and I would gain monetary, maybe even, a nice logo on my website or a testimonial. But the pain part of it is when, my son comes to me when he's, an adult and cognizant of the world, and says, like, so why did you do that project for that, like, horrible, unethical company? I'd rather not have that than the gain now. So that's definitely a big driver. Um, one of the other drivers of it is, for me, is it's about legacy, right? We've talked about that. I've had a lengthy career. I still got plenty of years to go. Like, I'm not that old,
yeah.
but I do think about it as legacy now. And we all see the AI generated billboards and such that talk about how you can't take the money with you, you can't take the success with you, and that's real. I mean, that is really real. That's something that was written about, like, by Roman emperors, right? And still is a real thing to this day. So I would rather be remembered for my legacy than my success. So that's a big driver for me.
Love that. I also agree with that wholeheartedly. For me, when I had kids, that legacy thing awoke in me. Like
Yeah.
it wasn't alive until I had kids. And then you're like, well, shit, excuse my French, but I they're gonna be right behind me when I go.
That's
Like
right.
there has to be something that I leave them that means something. And I mean, I'm a big cook. I love cooking. It's a side passion of mine, but I want them to cook all my food. I want them to have all
Yeah.
my recipes. One of my 10-year goals is to write my own cookbook with my own
Oh,
recipes.
nice.
self-publish it just for fun so my family and my friends can have my food when I
Love that.
leave.
Yeah,
Just something for fun, passion project on the side, but it is important to leave a legacy behind. But I just didn't, I wasn't awake enough before I had children. Now I feel like I am. So
understandable.
I love that. I have one more question.
Sure, as many as you want.
Yes. I like this one to close with, but if your voice had a volume setting in life, what number would you be at right now?
I would say a 9.
Okay.
Um, yeah, for sure. And that comes out of more than ever
Mm,
right now with being a solopreneur, doing the work that I'm doing, especially with working with, agency founders who are looking at me for my experience and for my past. I can't turn the volume down, right? I need to be, what I am. Also, in this time of AI, I've thought a lot about what makes me different than all the everything that's being generated. And this is something that I would encourage everyone listening to this is to stop muting because I think a lot of creative people are muting this right now. But to unmute your imagination and unmute, that is like our imaginations are like our godlike power.
absolutely.
And no, that's never going to go away. And, I put that into when I say a 9, my imagination is going harder than ever, and louder than ever because I'm, working with founders who are potentially muting their imagination because right now they're worried about, you know, technology, which has no imagination.
Right.
Not saying the people who created it didn't, they obviously did. And, don't let their imagination be louder than yours. So that's a big part of why it's at a 9. And, lastly, you're looking at a person who, has been through many, many cycles of the media industry, who now is all over social media, you know, and another outlet, another thing, and you've got to be loud there. And, I feel like my success has been about like leaning into what people would say is like extra about me and really just turning the volume on it instead of muting it. So I'm, when you said to me like, that's really extra about you, or my spouse says that, or my friends, I'm like, yeah, I'm definitely gonna crank the volume on that one because that's what makes me different. And, you gotta to be heard and to be seen, that's what you need to do.
Absolutely. I think that for brands too, when I'm working with them, I really
For
feel like
sure.
that's the one little thing that you can pull out and make you you. And I won't say AI isn't a great tool. I love all the tools.
Absolutely.
But I think that there is a piece of it where we're losing our confidence and it is muting the things that we say. Like, I'm afraid to send emails half the time without running it through ChatGPT
Right.
nowadays. But where is the me coming out in that? And if
Hmm.
one thing's misspelled, oh well, at least you
That's
know I
right. That's
wrote it.
right. But
I
that's it. I mean, that's about the imagination part as our
absolutely.
superpower, right? I mean, algorithms we spoke about and AI um, have us falling into a sea of sameness,
Mhm.
and it's our imaginations that will separate that for us. So instead of looking, to the algorithm or to AI for your, inspiration, you can use it to help you flush out. I mean, I'm, as someone who has a writing background, the blank page is my nightmare. And to get a little help with not having a blank page is awfully nice.
Mhm.
But it's my imagination, and I think that every creative, um, or anyone who is feeling muted, especially those moments when you're feeling really muted, your imagination is your way to even unmute yourself in your mind, even if you're sitting all by yourself,
Mhm.
all alone in a dark spot, or any of those places. That's your ticket out.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I am going to end the
Okay.
episode here. I have loved talking to you. I'm so glad that we have gotten to meet and talk, and you came and did this interview. I love hearing about your life, and I probably will continue to ask you more and more
Yes,
questions and
I'm
tell
here
you
for you.
about yourself. So thank you very much for our first unmuted
Thank you.
interview.
Yeah, honor to be the first one, and to it's always great to see you.